At exactly 12:03 a.m., everything in my house went black: lights, fridge, even the ceiling fan gave a final whine before stopping. At first, I thought it was a city-wide outage, but when I glanced outside, my neighbor's porch light was still glowing like a smug little firefly. My stomach sank. I knew right then this had HOA written all over it. My name's Archer Phelps. I'm a single dad, former electrician, and I've lived in Rosewood Pines for 6 years. Long enough to know when someone's trying to mess with me. And in this neighborhood, that someone is usually Sharon Tellman, the HOA president and the reigning queen of petty complaints. Middle-aged, bob haircut, and the kind of woman who thinks expired grass seed is a federal crime. She's been on my case ever since I installed solar panels without her aesthetic approval. I grabbed a flashlight and headed to the side of my house. The breaker box wasn't tripped. Odd. I followed the panel meter and froze. The meter had been tampered with. The plastic lock cover was broken, clearly forced open, and the main breaker was flipped off manually. Whoever did it knew exactly what they were doing. Someone had cut my power. On purpose. I stormed back inside, heart pounding, and called the non-emergency police line. I wasn't about to let this slide. As I waited for the officer to show up, I checked my security camera footage, and there she was, clear as day at 11:58 p.m. Sharon herself, sneaking around in her bathrobe and those ridiculous wedge sandals, fumbling with my panel like she was disarming a bomb. I couldn't believe it. She actually did it. 20 minutes later, a cruiser pulled up. Officer Ramirez knocked and I let him in. I played the footage back for him. "That's your HOA president?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yep, caught in the act," I said, my voice tight with anger. "She's not a licensed electrician. She has no authority to touch your panel. That's criminal tampering." "Good, because I want her charged," Ramirez nodded. "We'll handle it." As he walked back to his car to radio it in, I stood on my porch, arms crossed, staring down the street toward Sharon's house. Her lights were still on, of course. She had no idea what was coming. By morning, word had already started to spread. I got up early, made coffee on a camping stove in my garage, and stepped outside to find my neighbor, Mr. Delgado, watering his front shrubs. He paused when he saw me. "You all right? Heard a cruiser pulled up last night. She tampered with my power." "I've got her on camera," I said, keeping my voice steady. He blinked. "Sharon," caught red-handed. He shook his head slowly. "This neighborhood's gone to hell since she took over. You're not the only one she's been pushing around." That caught my ear. I set the coffee down on the porch rail. "You've had problems too." She fined me for repainting my shutters. Said the shade of blue was too patriotic. I didn't even know that was possible. I nodded. "You got documentation. Every letter she's sent me is in a folder." "Why?" "Because this isn't just about my power anymore." I spent the next hour knocking on doors. Not everyone answered, but those who did had stories. A retired nurse who was fined for installing a wheelchair ramp. A couple who received threats of lien notices over a bird bath they'd had for years. One guy, a truck driver on the road most weeks, told me Sharon had entered his backyard while he was gone and left a notice inside his screened porch. Everyone assumed it was just how HOAs worked. But when I mentioned the police getting involved, that changed their tune. People were tired. They just needed someone to be the first to push back. I drove to City Hall just before noon and requested public records on Rosewood Pines HOA. Financials, meeting minutes, bylaw amendments, anything they'd submitted. I had a feeling Sharon's power wasn't just about enforcing lawn heights and mailbox colors. In the lobby, the clerk asked if I was filing a complaint. "Not yet," I said, "but give me a few days." Back at home, I set up my laptop and started reviewing the footage again. I'd already handed a copy to Officer Ramirez, but I wanted to be thorough. That's when I noticed something I hadn't caught the first time. Sharon wasn't alone. Someone was standing near the edge of my fence, half hidden in the shadow. Tall, broad-shouldered. Male. He didn't approach the panel himself, but he was clearly there as backup. That changed things. I called Ramirez again. "There was someone else with her," I said as soon as he picked up. Big guy, didn't touch anything, but he was watching. Looked like he was keeping lookout. That's enough to add conspiracy. If we can ID him, can I send you a screenshot? Send it over. I'll run facial recognition through the city's software. I emailed it to him and sat back, tension coiling in my shoulders. I didn't like the idea that Sharon was bringing muscle. That meant she was either getting bold or scared. By late afternoon, Ramirez called back. Got a hit. His name's Devin Rusk, lives 2 streets over. He's not officially on the HOA board, but he's listed as a security consultant in their last annual report. Security consultant, I frowned. For what neighborhood bake sales? He's got priors. Nothing major trespassing, unlicensed contracting work. But enough to raise eyebrows. I leaned forward. Can you bring him in? Already requested a warrant. If you're right and this was coordinated, that's a felony. 2 hours later, I heard a patrol car roll down the street. I didn't need to look to guess where it was headed. Sure enough, 10 minutes later, Devin was in cuffs on the sidewalk, protesting loudly as 2 officers loaded him into the back. I didn't celebrate. Not yet. I knew Sharon was still the one pulling the strings. The next morning, I got a knock on the door. It wasn't the police, it was Abigail Tran, who lived at the end of the street. She looked nervous, folding her arms across her chest like she wasn't sure if she should even be here. I heard about what happened, she said. And I think I can help. Come in. She stepped inside, glancing around like someone might be watching. Once we sat down, she pulled out a folder. I'm the HOA's secretary, or I was, until Sharon pushed through a bylaw change that replaced officer elections with appointments. She assigned her own people and told me I was no longer aligned with the board's vision. Did you keep any records? She opened the folder. Meeting transcripts, email printouts, financial statements, some highlighted, some with notes scribbled in the margins. She's been siphoning funds into a discretionary account labeled Community Improvement Projects, but there's no documentation on how those funds are used. No receipts, no invoices. Last year, she moved over $70,000. I stared at the numbers. That's embezzlement. I know. But I didn't have the resources to fight her. You do now. We spent the rest of the afternoon organizing the records into a timeline. Every transaction, every questionable vote, every time Sharon bypassed protocol. I copied everything onto a flash drive and drafted a formal complaint to the county district attorney's office, attaching the footage, the financials, and a signed affidavit from Abigail. That evening, Ramirez called again. DA's office is taking it seriously. They're opening an investigation. You might want to keep your cameras rolling. Oh, they're rolling, and I just installed 2 more. The next day, a black SUV rolled up in front of Sharon's house. County investigators. I watched from my driveway as they knocked. She opened the door in her usual blouse and pearls, but the moment they showed their badges, her entire posture changed. They weren't there to chat. Within 20 minutes, they walked her to the vehicle, hands cuffed behind her back. A few neighbors peeked out from windows. Delgado stepped out with his arms crossed, nodding once in my direction. I didn't wave. I didn't gloat. I just watched as the woman who tried to run our neighborhood like her personal kingdom was driven away by the very system she thought she controlled. She wasn't untouchable after all. 3 days after Sharon was taken in, the usual silence of Rosewood Pines had turned into a low buzz of speculation. Some folks kept their heads down and lawns trimmed tighter than ever, as if hoping tidy hedges would keep subpoenas from landing in their mailboxes. Others lingered a little longer on their porches, casting glances toward her now vacant house like it might cough up secrets. I wasn't interested in gossip. I had work to do. That morning, I headed to the county clerk's office. The DA's team had frozen the HOA's accounts pending investigation, but I wanted to make sure no one tried to start them back up under a different name. I requested a freeze on any new filings related to Rosewood Pines Homeowners Association. A clerk named Missy, with a coffee stain on her sleeve and a steel trap memory, tapped a few keys and frowned. Someone came in yesterday afternoon, she said slowly. Tried to register Rosewood Community Standards Council, same address, same board members minus Sharon. My jaw tightened. Did they succeed? Missy turned the monitor so I could see. I flagged it for review. It's on hold for now. They thought they could relabel the whole thing and dodge the fallout, I muttered. Looks that way. I thanked her and left. On the drive home, I called Abigail. Her voice was flat and focused. They're trying to salvage control, she said. I still have access to the HOA's group email archive. Should I check for messages referencing the new name? Absolutely. We need to know who's still pulling strings. Later that afternoon, she forwarded me a chain between the remaining board members Cynthia LaRue, Greg Toller, and a guy named Brent who no one ever saw outside of Zoom meetings. They'd been planning to shift operations under the new name and start collecting dues again quietly, using a P.O. box and a new checking account opened in Greg's name. They were trying to reconstitute a dissolved HOA under a shell entity while under criminal investigation. That wasn't just unethical, it was bank fraud. I sent the email chain directly to the DA's office. 5 hours later, they issued 3 more warrants. The next morning, 2 unmarked sedans parked near the community pool house, and by noon, Cynthia and Greg were picked up. Brent had already skipped town. Ramirez called to let me know the U.S. Postal Inspection Service was now involved, since the P.O. box and mail forwarding trick crossed federal lines. Looks like this just became a federal case, he said. And Greg, he flipped, he's talking. Good, I said. Because I want every one of them held accountable. By the end of the week, the neighborhood felt different. Not better yet, just quieter, like everyone was waiting to see where the pieces landed. I started noticing people doing things they hadn't dared for years. A woman across the street planted sunflowers that didn't match the HOA's color palette. The retired teacher on the corner pulled her wind chimes out of storage and hung them proudly on her porch. One afternoon, a group of neighbors gathered in my driveway. Delgado, Abigail, and a few others. Nobody said much at first until a man I hadn't spoken to before, maybe in his 60s with a Vietnam vet hat, stepped forward. "I've got a question," he said. "What happens now? HOA's dead, but the bylaws are still on file. Are we just a free-for-all until someone else grabs the reins?" "We don't have to let anyone grab them," I said. "We can vote to dissolve the HOA for good. It'll take a majority signature petition and a formal filing with the county, but it's doable." Delgado nodded. "You think people will go for it? They are already halfway there. We just need to show them it's legal." Abigail raised a hand. "I can draft the petition, but we'll need someone to serve as interim representative while we sort things out." Everyone looked at me. "I don't want to run anything," I said automatically. "You're not running it," said the vet. "You're cleaning it up." I took a breath. "Only until the paperwork's done." We spent the next 3 days canvassing every home in the neighborhood. Some people were hesitant, afraid of losing the structure the HOA provided. But when we explained how Sharon and her board had weaponized that structure, cutting power, misusing funds, and trying to rebuild under a fake name, most were quick to sign. By the end of the week, we had over 80% of the neighborhood on board. We filed the petition and submitted it with a detailed report of the HOA's misconduct. The county reviewed everything, and within 10 days, Rosewood Pines HOA was officially dissolved. But the legal fallout wasn't over. The DA's office issued a public statement confirming that Sharon and her co-conspirators were being charged with multiple counts: criminal tampering, attempted fraud, misappropriation of funds, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Sharon's bail was denied after prosecutors submitted evidence that she tried to move funds into an offshore account under the guise of a neighborhood improvement grant. Turns out she wasn't just petty, she was greedy and sloppy. Devin Rusk, the so-called security consultant, cut a deal in exchange for testimony. His statement included a detail none of us had expected. Sharon had paid him under the table to intimidate residents who pushed back. The midnight power stunt, not the first time. There were at least 4 other incidents: cutting irrigation lines, loosening fence panels, even slashing tires. All of it documented now, all of it admissible. The community came together in ways I had never seen before. We held our first real town hall in the park near the retention pond. No gavel, no dress code, no agenda, just people talking like neighbors. We decided to form a voluntary neighborhood council with no enforcement power, just coordination for things like trash collection and seasonal cleanup. No dues. No fines. No power games. One evening, while I adjusted the new solar controller I'd installed, this time with a reinforced lockbox, I noticed Abigail walking up the sidewalk with a clipboard. "We're putting together a community archive," she said. "Something to document everything that happened, so we don't forget." I looked at the clipboard. It was already half filled with signatures, old photos, and even a copy of the petition that dissolved the HOA. "Smart," I said. "People forget fast when things go quiet." She smiled, tired but hopeful. "Not this time." As she walked away, I looked down the street where sunflowers bloomed beside blue shutters and wind chimes danced in the breeze. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't even polished, but it was ours again, and this time no one was going to flip a switch on us in the dark. The first court date arrived on a gray Thursday morning, the sky hanging low like it knew what was about to go down. I parked 2 blocks from the courthouse on purpose, needed the walk to clear my head. I wasn't nervous, just focused. I had a binder tucked under my arm, packed with hard copies of everything. Time-stamped camera footage, financial records, Abigail's annotated meeting logs, and the county's certified HOA dissolution decree. Inside the courtroom, Sharon sat at the defendant's table flanked by her attorney, a wiry man with slicked-back hair and a face that looked like it had never cracked a smile. She didn't look at me, not once. Her pearls were gone. Replaced with a stiff gray blouse and the kind of expression you see on people waiting for a root canal, District Attorney Leslie Granger approached me before the hearing began. She was sharp-eyed, mid-40s, and had the kind of voice that made you sit straighter. "You'll be giving testimony next week," she said, flipping through her own binder. "Today's about presenting the charges and submitting the exhibits, but I wanted to tell you personally your documentation made this possible. Without it, we'd still be piecing together hearsay." I nodded. "Glad it helped. You know, she tried to start a whole new association while under investigation, we know. And we're folding that into the conspiracy charge. The judge already approved a motion to freeze the secondary account." When the hearing began, the courtroom filled with quiet tension. The charges were read aloud: 7 counts of criminal tampering, 3 counts of mail fraud, 2 counts of wire fraud, 1 count of unlawful surveillance, and 1 count of intimidation through proxy. Devin Rusk's name came up during that last one. Apparently, he'd already entered a plea deal and agreed to testify in full, implicating Sharon and the board members. Her attorney tried to challenge the admissibility of the security footage, but the judge shut it down without much debate. Chain of custody was airtight. Ramirez had logged and stored it per protocol, and the original timestamps were untouched. Afterward, I stepped out into the hallway and found Abigail waiting near the vending machines. "Judge didn't waste time," she said, handing me a plastic water bottle. "From what I overheard, her lawyer's angling for a plea deal." "She won't take it," I said. "Not yet. She still thinks she can talk her way out." Abigail leaned against the wall. "If she drags this out, the feds might step in." The postal inspector's office opened their own file. Apparently, she used the HOA mailing list to target residents with fraudulent notices. Some of them included fake citations for violations that didn't even exist. That was new. "They can prove that. They've got the originals." Cynthia LaRue saved her correspondence out of paranoia. Kept it all in a fireproof safe. The feds matched the postmarks to a return address Sharon used on a fake HOA letterhead. I let out a low breath. That was beyond petty. That was predatory. Back at Rosewood Pines, people were starting to settle into a new rhythm. Without the HOA's grip, yards got more colorful, fences a little more eclectic. And for the first time in years, people actually talked to each other. Not just polite nods, but full-on conversations. The kind that came with borrowed tools and shared lemonade. A week later, I took the stand. I walked up, placed my binder on the rail, and answered every question Granger threw at me. She kept it precise, establishing the timeline, the footage, the tampering, and most importantly, the pattern. When she asked how it affected me personally, I didn't go for theatrics. I just told the truth. My kid was asleep when the power cut. I had no idea if it was a city issue or something worse. When I found the panel forced open, I realized someone had made a choice to do this to us. Not because we'd done anything wrong, but because they wanted control. That's not just illegal. It's dangerous. Sharon's lawyer tried to rattle me during cross-examination, asked if I had a grudge against the HOA, if I'd ever violated community standards myself. I didn't flinch. I installed solar panels. That's legal in this state and protected under the Solar Rights Act. If the HOA had issues with it, they could have taken it to mediation. Instead, they cut my power. That's not enforcement, that's sabotage. When I stepped down, I caught a glimpse of Sharon's expression. She wasn't angry. She looked hollow, like she'd finally realized the throne she'd built was made of stacked complaints and empty threats. 2 days later, the plea deal was announced. Sharon pled guilty to wire fraud, criminal tampering, and conspiracy to defraud residents. In exchange for a reduced sentence, she agreed to forfeit her personal assets acquired during her tenure, including a leased vehicle charged to the HOA's discretionary budget, a home renovation paid through redirected maintenance fees, and a private security system installed with association funds. She also agreed to testify against Brent, who'd been apprehended in Nevada trying to open a new community management firm. Greg and Cynthia were sentenced to 18 months probation and banned from holding any fiduciary or administrative role in any housing organization for 10 years. Sharon got 4 years in state prison with a mandatory restitution clause. She would be repaying over $76,000 to the neighborhood fund, structured over 15 years. Failure to pay would result in seizure of her remaining assets. The day the sentence was announced, the community threw a block party in the park. No one said it was a celebration. But there was music, folding chairs, barbecue, and more laughter than I'd ever heard on this street. People brought dishes from every corner of the neighborhood. A few kids rode bikes between lawn games. For a moment, it actually felt like the place we all thought we were moving into years ago. Delgado brought over a clipboard and set it on the table next to me. "What's this?" I asked. "Proposal for a neighborhood watch." Not the kind with whistles and clipboards, just folks checking in on each other, making sure no one's pulling stunts behind lawns. I flipped through the pages. No officers, no fines. No power trips, he said. Just neighbors looking out for neighbors. I signed it. Abigail stood at the edge of the grass, talking to a few residents about setting up a shared tool shed. She'd become the unofficial point person for community projects. No titles, just trust. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and the grills cooled, I walked back home and paused at the edge of my driveway. The solar panels caught the last bit of light, humming quietly. I checked the lock on the power box, reinforced steel, still intact. Inside, my son was on the couch, reading by the warm glow of lamplight. I closed the door behind me and let the quiet fill the space. The HOA had tried to make an example of me. But in the end, they became the warning, and we built something better on the ashes of their control. Something they never saw coming, a community without fear.